Hello, everyone. It is great to be here with you all again after a couple of months of not seeing each other online. I'm going to get Joe to pop up our video that I want to share with you all today to dive us into what I want to be talking about with you. So, can you all, hold on a second here. Let's get this to play. All right. So this is a video that our crew took while we were doing field work for some of the science that we're doing last year. Does anyone know what's happening in this video?
All right, we've got a couple groups backstage, so I'm going to pop them in and we'll take some guesses to what's happening in the video. So our 4-5s, what do you think's happening in this video?
Oh, man, really?
Deforestation.
What's happening? Yeah.
Deforestation, yeah. What do you think, 7th graders? I brought in our 7th graders as well.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez?
Deforestation and logging.
Right. So I heard deforestation, logging, couper des arbres. We have a francophone class with us here, and so it's always nice to hear that. And so here we see a piece of machinery that's in a part of Quebec, just cutting down trees. And this is something that happens a lot in Canada, right? We cut down trees to make all kinds of things. We need these trees to be able to make toilet paper that we use every day, to build the houses that many of us live in, and for lots of different resources. And one thing that I think is really kind of cool about this is that trees can grow back fairly quickly. So this is a resource that could be considered a reusable resource, unlike something like oil and gas, which come from the ground, and really there's kind of a finite amount of it available, or a limited amount of it available. Trees, once you cut them down, technically they can grow back. But as you do that process of cutting down trees, you really want to make sure, or ideally try as hard as possible, for that cutting down of trees not to hurt people, animals, and the environment. And so for that to happen, we need to be thinking about cutting down trees in the most friendly possible ways for all those different things, for people, for animals, for the environment. And so what I want to do is tell you that as a scientist, I'm really interested in what happens to one of Canada's, or one of the most predominant landscapes in Canada, when trees are cut down around them. And so the landscape I'm talking about is freshwaters. So what you see here is like a river that's flowing through a landscape. And then on the side of the screen, just to play this video again, you see that trees have been cut down not too far from the water. And it is true that in Canada, there is both a lot of cutting down of trees and a lot of freshwater. And so we really need to be thinking about how we can cut down trees, all the while, so that we can have those important things we need, like toilet paper and products to build our houses and this and that, all the while protecting and conserving this important thing that is freshwaters. And I think this is really important, especially in Canada, because there is tons of freshwater in our country. So this is a map of Canada. I know that we've got a class joining us from BC, so I'll just kind of put my cursor onto the part of the map here. Oh, I don't know if you can see that. All right, well, that's okay. But can maybe the different classrooms can try and work with their teachers to figure out where they are located on this map. This is a map of Canada. We've got kind of the Great Lakes, the Hudson Bay. Those are some key markers. Does any class want to kind of jump online and tell us where they are on this map? Describe to us where they are.
Right there in the very bottom, where the lakes are.
Where Lake Ontario is, and the Rouge River.
Right, yeah, okay, so a classroom joining from the Toronto area, close to the Rouge River, nearby the Great Lakes. And I think what's incredible about this map is that everything that you see on it, these lines represent the freshwater that is in Canada. So these lines are all the lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands that exist in this country. There is a lot of fresh water. We are one of the countries in the world that actually carries the most fresh water. And so that's kind of clear when you look at the blue lines. But what I want to tell you about these other colored lines, or the chunks of the map that are more like in brown and beige, that's actually also fresh water. It's just that that is fresh water, or lakes and rivers, that have had timber harvesting around them. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of the water in Canada that is connected to a history of harvesting, or that has had harvesting upstream of it. And so now I want to take that complicated word upstream or upland that you see at the bottom of this map and break that down for you and explain, what do I mean by upland? So let's go on here. This is a picture of a watershed, and explaining what the word watershed means, or kind of diving into that, is really important for understanding what I mean by upland and what I mean in terms of there's a connection between timber harvesting and water. So if we look at this map here, or this image that you see, this is showing what a watershed is. And basically, everything that is found in that dotted white line that's going around this image is the watershed of the lake that you see at the very tip of the image. And essentially what a watershed is an area that is kind of all hydrologically connected. So it's connected by water that's moving across the landscape. And so let's say rain falls into the part of this map where there are trees, or of this image where there are trees. That water eventually is all going to flow towards this lake that we see at the bottom of the watershed. And this is really important when it comes to something like timber harvesting, because there are tons of connections between land and water, right? Sometimes we think about water as this thing that moves through landscapes, but not as something that is connected to it. But really, they're so connected. And so if suddenly we bring in a truck and we start cutting down all the trees in this part of the watershed, that has big potential to influence all the water that is found downstream of that cut, or of where those trees have been cut down. So imagine we go and we cut some trees down here. Well, this might have effects on everything that's happening in the water. And now what I want to do is talk a little bit about, like, well, how do you think timber harvesting could actually affect freshwaters? What does it do to cut down the trees that are found around a river or a lake? Let's get some classes in with us, kind of brainstorming some ideas of what this might do. And we can actually go back to this image, because maybe that will inspire you and give you some ideas.
All right, I'm going to grab our 7th graders in Squamish and see if they have some ideas.
Go ahead.
I think that if you cut down trees along the side of a river, it can destabilize the riverbank.
Yeah, that's right. So that's great. It's true. If you cut down trees beside a river, this can absolutely destabilize a riverbank. Think about trees as, like, there are these big organisms, right? These big plants that live along the riverbank, and they have big root structures that are along the riverbank. And so if you cut down the tree, suddenly you end up with much less structure in the soil. And that destabilization can lead to all kinds of other things. I'll talk about them more, but let's hear some more from your classroom about other ways that timber harvesting could possibly affect freshwaters.
Add more bacteria to the water.
Possibly add more bacteria to the water. Yeah, maybe if there's bacteria. Imagine, so the person before you just talked about destabilizing the riverbank, right? If there's lots of bacteria on the riverbank, and suddenly there are no more trees to keep that bacteria in the soil, and it starts to rain a lot, well, all the bacteria that's in the soil might find its way in the water. And I mean, bacteria is one thing that could happen, but there's also lots of other things that could be pulled into the water, like earth and like different nutrients, or maybe pesticides, and all that has big implications for how healthy the water is. Let's hear again from your class.
Possibly, beavers use wood as dams, which is very much used to control the water flow. And if there's not enough trees and something goes wrong with the dam, it could do a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. You know what? I haven't often thought about the relationship between timber harvesting and beavers, but you're right. If suddenly we cut down all the trees that beavers are usually themselves cutting down, it doesn't leave much for the beavers to do, right? So this is another really good example of connection between land and water. We've got these animals that live both in the water and on land, and suddenly if we start changing things on the land, it can have big implications for them in terms of their ability to feed themselves and to do well. But it can also have huge implications in the water. You're right. Like if a beaver population that's been around for hundreds of years suddenly disappears, well, the dam that they've been caring for may also suddenly disappear. And that could result in big amounts of water moving in different ways. And those, when big amounts of water start moving like that, they often transport with them all kinds of things, right? So they could be transporting sediments that then make it really hard for the fish that are swimming in the water to see what's going on around them and to do well, or that make it really hard for the insects that live there to live there because they were used to living in water that was clear, or used to living in water where there wasn't a bunch of debris in the water or on the bottom of the stream that they live in. Okay. Any final ideas from any of our classes about how timber harvesting could affect freshwater?
Yes. Okay, Afika.
It'll change the
I see a
pH.
class coming in, so just give it a minute to make sure our internet is keeping up with us.
Okay.
It'll change the pH and make it more acidic.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear
Feeling
me?
So I think we have a connectivity issue with this classroom. Joe, do you still hear
So-
me?
I can, yeah, I hear you and I hear the class okay. You can't hear the 4-5s?
No, I don't hear them. I've just got a spinning window of unhearable. Maybe you could
It's
relay
not-
back to me.
Okay.
Tell us
they're-
what you're hearing.
He hears us.
They're asking, or she's saying it could change the pH of the water.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so these are things that you've measured with your classrooms when you've gone out and done your kind of collecting of water samples at your local streams. Thank you so much for bringing that up. You're totally right. Right. If you change kind of what's going into the water, so the amount of nutrients flowing into the water, or maybe even the temperature of the water, because if you cut down all the trees around the water, suddenly there's less shade. That all comes with kind of consequences on things like pH, or the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water, which fish need to function properly. And so the point that I'm trying to get across here, and that I see that you've all clearly understood, is that land and water are connected. And when you cut down trees on the land, it can have consequences on the water. And so if we come back to this image we're looking at here, if we're to cut down these trees, well, all the water that's flowing from the stream around which we've cut down the trees into the lake could maybe have things like more sediments in it, or a different pH, or a different amount of dissolved oxygen, or different changes in temperature to what it had before the trees were cut. And so that's kind of like, okay, we know that timber harvesting can affect freshwaters, but maybe there's something we can do about that. And really, there is something we can do about it. We can design or plan timber harvesting activities to try and make it so that they minimize effects on freshwaters, make it so that we're kind of doing the harvesting in the best possible way, so there aren't any negative things happening to the freshwater to which it's connected. And so here's an example of how we currently do that in many parts of Canada. Does anyone see something that's happening between where the harvesting is here and where the water is on this video footage?
Is it right by the water?
No.
Something special, I guess I would call it.
Right? Yeah. So who wants to say that? So we noticed something. Go for it,
So
Stella.
Joe, unfortunately, I'm still having trouble seeing the classroom. If there's speakers.
I'll relay it for you. The 4-5s are coming up now.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
We also learned that.
No, what you notice here
Oh,
about the trees, they're next to they're bordering the water. Right?
they're bordering the water.
The trees are bordering the water, is what she
That's
said.
right. Yeah, the trees are bordering the water. That's exactly it. And this is commonly referred to as something we call a buffer zone. So there are laws in Canada that make it that when a timber harvesting company is going in to extract wood so that we can do things like use toilet paper and build our homes with the wood that we extract, we're thinking about, well, how can we do that while protecting freshwaters? And one of the ways that we've thought about doing that so far is by building these buffer zones on the side of freshwaters. And so often, like here, the harvesting company didn't go all the way down to the water because the law actually doesn't allow them to. We've put in regulations. And the idea is that by keeping that buffer zone along the water, we're kind of creating a barrier between the effects of the timber harvesting and the freshwater bodies. Now, these barriers are an amazing start, and I'm so happy that we're doing this in most of Canada and in most contexts here where we do harvesting in the country, but they're really just a start. We actually need much more information about how timber harvesting affects freshwaters to really be able to design timber harvesting so that we minimize its effects on freshwaters. And that's where people like me that are scientists doing research on this topic come in. A big part of my job is to try and figure out, well, what happens, if we organize our timber harvesting in different ways? And so I'll just switch ahead here. Like, one of the things that I think about a lot as a scientist is if we have our timber harvesting here, where we have it in this watershed, versus down here, right beside the lake, how does that affect the freshwaters? Where do we feel impacts and where do we not feel impacts? And how can we design our timber harvesting so that it's happening both in the right places and at the right times to minimize effects on freshwaters? And so one of the ways that our team is working to try and really help out addressing that question is by visiting 100 streams in the four different provinces in Canada where there is the most timber harvesting. So that's British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. There are lots of other places in Canada where there is timber harvesting, but these are kind of the four provinces where there is the most of it. And so we're visiting 100 streams across these four different provinces that have different types or amounts or arrangements of timber harvesting around them. So we can start to answer some of these questions and feed the information that we're finding back to policy so we can come up with new and improved regulations that go beyond just those buffer zones to protect freshwaters and really start thinking at a landscape scale, because we need to be planning kind of across the country how to minimize impacts everywhere, all the while still kind of obtaining as much as possible of these resources that we so heavily lean on and need. And what I wanted to do next is kind of share some images of what that kind of work looks like. I know that you all joined us in the field earlier this year, and so you already have a sense of what it's like, but I thought I'd share some highlights from our time in the field. This is us using a net to collect insects in our local stream, which is something I'm hoping you'll all get the chance to do in the months ahead, or that maybe you've even already done with your classes. And after I'm done sharing some pictures, I want to really hear about your stories of what's happened in your classes doing this work. And so this is us collecting insects, and we use insects are actually a really good indicator of what's happening on the landscape around them. If there is a lot of timber harvesting around a stream, you start to see different types of insects living in that stream than if there was very little timber harvesting around it. And so what we're doing is collecting insects and then looking at them under the microscope and counting them to figure out what kind of insects live there and what that tells us about how different amounts of timber harvesting affects the biodiversity that's found in freshwaters. We're also actually collecting information about fish at the same time so that we can find out what fish are living there and how timber harvesting is affecting fish. And we're doing that using an approach that's called environmental DNA. And so, well, this is actually a water quality sample, but the eDNA approach is kind of similar. So this is us collecting water from a stream and then filtering it so we can find out exactly about what's in the water. Are there lots of sediments in there? Are there nutrients? Are there, someone earlier mentioned bacteria. That could be another thing that we could look at in the water. We're really interested in nutrients because one of the big things that happens when you take trees off a landscape, when all the rain starts falling onto that landscape, it will pull nutrients with it into the water, and that can really throw a water body out of its usual state. So it will end up having more nutrients than it did before. And so this is us collecting water samples, and we do use a similar approach to collect environmental DNA, which we take our little sample and we send it back to the lab, and we can learn about every single species of fish and insect that lives in the waterway. And then we're also collecting information about water quality. And maybe this image looks familiar to some of you. Do any of you see something that you might have seen before on this image, or a logo that you've seen before?
All right, what do you think, grade 7s? Do you see anything familiar in there?
The backpack has the freshwater life.
Yeah, right. So it's a Water Rangers backpack, and each of your classes have received a kit from Water Rangers, which is this incredible organization that works across Canada and also in the United Kingdom. And they work to kind of help connect people to their waterways and help us gather more information about water, because the reality is that there is not that much information out there about all the water that is found across Canada. There are many water bodies that we don't really know much about, kind of the oxygen or the pH or the temperature in that water body. And so Water Rangers has been built to help connect people from all over the country to their waterways. And as part of our project, we use these kits to better understand what's going on in the water. And I wanted to bring this up because I know that all of your classes are also using these kits. And the data that you're collecting is actually data that myself as a scientist, I'm in turn going to go and use to kind of look at the relationship between the places where you've collected information about water and whether or not there's been timber harvesting upstream of the locations where you found water, and whether or not that timber harvesting has had an effect on the water that you've collected. So I want to thank you all for this work that you've been doing and that you're going to continue to do this year, collecting water samples, because that's really useful. It is so hard for someone like me to get out to all the streams that I would like to. And so having you all kind of participate in our project and help us collect information about more places is something we're really appreciative of and happy to get this data about water from. And the good thing about Water Rangers is that the data you're collecting is then not just shared with me, but it's actually shared in an open source online platform that anyone can access and turn to. And so lots of scientists from around the world are turning to these open source data sets to find out more about water and to start asking important questions about it that can help us actually do better in terms of resource extraction and management of landscapes to protect our waterways. And in this work, I feel really fortunate. I get to visit all kinds of beautiful places. This is a picture from the North Saskatchewan River as it flows through Alberta. It flows through many different parts of Canada, but this is its portion in Alberta. We were there with our team last fall, and after kind of unloading there, we were able to camp there for the night and see the beautiful evening stars and warm ourselves up by the fire. And we also get to see lots of cool things in the water. And so the last thing I wanted to share with you today is this really cool video of one of the insects we found. And it looks like it's doing push-ups. I don't really know why, but it's pretty funky looking. This is a Plycoptera, a type of benthic invertebrate that's found in the water and that is typically, it doesn't really like to be in streams that have had too much pollution in them or too much kind of disturbance. And so it's always a good sign when you start seeing individuals of this fun species. Play that video one more time for you. And then I want to get classrooms in here sort of sharing stories of anything that you've learned about the streams that you visited and any questions or thoughts that you have about what we've just talked about.
All right. Very cool video, Dalal. Yeah, let's bring in our classes. Let's see if they want to tell us any stories or things that they've learned, you know, from their time out in the field. Of course, questions are fair game about what we talked about today about rivers and how deforestation can impact them, or maybe just any questions you had from being out in the field and exploring, you know, your local bodies of water. Let me know. Do the 4 5s. I'm going to bring them in first. Do they show up for you now, or are they still?
Like a fish.
I am seeing them now, yeah.
Okay, good.
In the creek beside the river. In the spring. Okay, so we're up. Hello. So, okay, so you're supposed to come up. Come on up. Emma's coming up. So Emma's going to tell you what she found in a creek next to the river we were studying. So we've gone in the spring, and there's a lot more groundwater in the spring towards going to the river that we normally study at. And she actually scooped something up, so she's going to let you know and maybe ask a little bit about it because we couldn't find and identify what it was.
Okay.
So what you've got.
We found a translucent fish, and it was like
It looked like a fish, but we don't know if it was a bug. So it had a very orange sort of dorsal fin, but everything was a see-through. It was transparent to the naked eye because we didn't have any magnifiers to look at it. And we weren't sure what it was, if it was the beginning of a fish or if it was metamorphosis of a bug. We weren't sure, but it was living in the creeks towards the river. So,
and you said that it had a dorsal fin on it?
It looked like a dorsal fin that was very it was actually using it for movement.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I don't know off the top of my head exactly what that is, but definitely if it had a dorsal fin, it sounds like it probably is a fish. One thing I can say is a lot of juvenile fish, so that is like baby fish, when they first are kind of really young, they will be quite translucent. So that's absolutely possible that you found a fish. And one thing that's really cool is it sounds like this was kind of an area of water that is there sometimes and maybe isn't there sometimes.
Yeah, and so that was a concern. Like, how does that animal make it to the river where there is water most of the time?
Yeah, well, was there connection between that water and the river, or was it totally?
So it looked like there was at one point, but we're finding that the whole area is pretty dried out in general, even for the spring.
Yeah. Yeah, so that can happen, right? I mean, I can't guarantee that what you saw was a fish, but it sounds, if it had a dorsal fin, it most likely was a fish. And I will say, like, fish love going to hatch their eggs in places that are like, I mean, it depends on the fish, but many fish like to hatch their eggs in places that have a lot of habitat structure. And so what I mean by habitat structure is like places with leaves and branches and plants, because it's a really good hideout, right? You don't want to be subject to being, have your offspring be subject to being eaten by larger fish the minute that they hatch. And so often fish will lay eggs in parts of a stream or a water body that have more protection. And sometimes when there's like a big amount of water that comes through, you'll have new sections of a river open up. And then maybe the fish lays their eggs there and then they go off and they do their thing. But maybe by the time the eggs hatch, actually there's no more connectivity between that area and the bigger water body. And so that could be a case where fish end up stuck there and there's really nowhere to go and the water body dries out and that's the end of their life. There are some fish around the world that have actually evolved the ability to move over land to deal with that problem. You can look that up. There are really cool fish that kind of are known for their abilities to walk, quote unquote, across land. And some of them have even evolved like special limbs that help in that process that look a little bit like an arm and leg or arms and legs. And so I think probably what you saw is a fish that ended up in a tricky situation that might not find its way back to the bigger river, but that's also part of life. It happens sometimes. For sure, like I guess one of the more challenging things is that it can happen in ways that it wasn't happening before. You know, if maybe the fish are spawning there because it's always been really wet, but now suddenly it dries up quickly. And so the expectation might have been that would be a fine place to lay eggs, and it maybe no longer is today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
What a cool observation. I'm so glad you guys
was really cool. Yeah, it was really cool. But there was enough water that we had to figure out how to get the water from the river because the bank was unavailable to go down this time. So we did see some changes.
Yeah, you get to see it changes a lot over the course of a season, right? And water, one of the things, like in the Canadian context, because we have winters in most of the country, imagine the winter is like it snows and all that water sits there on the landscape, and then suddenly everything gets warmer and it melts. And so we call that the spring freshet, when like all the snow starts to melt and you'll get big booms in water. That's why there's often a lot of flooding in the spring. It has to do with all that snow melting.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions or observations from our 4-5s, our 7s had to go. Their period ended.
Oh, no.
So they just signed off on us. So 4-5s, if you have anything more you'd like to talk about today or ask about.
Maybe someone can share in the class what we're actually working on in a big way right now. Who would like to share what we're working on? Okay, Noah, you want to come up? So Noah's going to come and let you know what we're working on right now. And then maybe you can give us some advice.
I'd love to hear about it. I know that all the classrooms, like for the classrooms that are tuning in after this live event, I know that everyone's been working really hard on your freshwater conservation action project and your story map to go with that. And we're really excited about meeting up next month to share that. So I'd love to hear what's happening in your class at the West Rouge.
So we're doing a freshwater culminating project on WeVideo, where we're basically going to make a documentary talking about what we did through this year and the data we collected and that kind of stuff. And then we're going to share it with you guys soon.
And we're going to share it with our school and neighborhood. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's so cool to hear. I'm really glad to hear that we'll get to see a little bit more about what you guys have been doing in the area of the Rouge. And that sounds like an awesome project. I can't wait to see it. And I'm really glad to hear that you have plans to share it, not only with the other classrooms that are part of this program, but also with the rest of your school and maybe people in your neighborhood. This is really important stuff to share. You know, I think one of the things, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I know that like water, you know, and fresh water is something I loved swimming in lakes when I was a kid, but I didn't realize that there was so much of it in the cities that I grew up in. It's actually everywhere. As you saw on that map I showed you, there is so much fresh water in Canada, but it's very much out of sight, out of mind, kind of not at the forefront of how we think. And the reality is that it's also not at the forefront of how we plan and how we've done research historically. And so it's really cool to have you all paying attention to this super important habitat and sharing that with more people, because the more people care about water, the better we're going to do at caring for it and protecting it into the future.
Yes, for sure. Is there someone that we could, at the ministry level, maybe share this information with?
That's a great idea. I think maybe a good path. That's actually a really great idea, and I think a good pathway would be to write to your local MP with kind of a copy of what you've produced and maybe some reflections of participation in the program. That would be great. The other thing I can share is that Canada now has a new Canada Water Agency. And this is a new agency that has been put together to kind of address some of the problems that exist and how we've historically, or how not historically, but how we've recently in Canada tried to steward waters in a very separated way across the different provinces. But that doesn't work well, because water, it doesn't like respect provincial boundaries, right? Water moves all over. And so the Canada Water Agency was really built to try and address that. And so I think it'd be really cool to try and find some people from there to share what you've done.
Okay, great. We'll do that for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And just to add, if you're going to do a presentation for the school or the community, definitely take a couple little video clips. It'd be really cool to see the students presenting.
That would be great. Yes, sure. Absolutely.
All right. Perfect.
Well,
Thanks
good
for
luck
that.
wrapping up your project. Thank you all for working on that. And I can't wait till we meet next month to go over that together.
Thank you. Yes, we'll look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Well, Dalal, thank you so much. That was a great insight into the work that you and the team are doing. We don't often get to see how expansive it is. So we have our classrooms across the country, but to see all the rivers and the people who are out doing that important sampling, it's really exciting to see the scope of this project that the students are involved in.
Yeah. So thank you all. And I can't wait to connect soon and learn more about your freshwater conservation action projects. It's really cool. And again, thank you everyone for going out to your local streams and collecting data. It's going to be helpful to find out more about freshwaters.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We're going to end the stream for today, but you can find the recording on the YouTube channel.
Take care.